Winnie knew Warren had given him up to brother Michael, and while he couldn't work out why his own brother would do that, in time he would forgive him. He loved his brother, and I still do, but he never forgot. Lesson learned, never rat on anyone ever. Right there and then, Winnie made a vow. No bastard would ever make a fool of him again. He didn't mention the episode to anyone, especially his parents, because they always believed whatever the brothers said. Simple lesson. That little episode delivered another simple lesson. He and his mate Brian were not going straight. They didn't have long to wait to find out what not going straight meant. One Saturday, Fairfield Racetrack had a gymkhana, and all Winnie could think about was more horses, so tons more horse shit. If they could sell it all that day, they'd have enough for the bikes. Brian arrived at Winnie's carrying extra sugar bags. This might be the last week, mate. To find extra customers, they went to a new area, knocked on doors. Kids they knew from school laughed at them. Yeah, like it was making an earn. It wouldn't have mattered if there hadn't been any girls around, but there were. So we had these slug guns we pulled about, we just fired at them, yeah? That's what you do when you're young, isn't it? Anyway, but there were, so we pulled out the air rifles and took a few pot shots at the boys and told them to get fucked. Stung from the slugs, the kids yelled back insults and scurried off like rats. The extra sales resulted in a pocket full of cold cash, almost double their normal return. But there was trouble that night. The coppers got us on the way home. Winnie told the cops that he'd been robbed. He was only trying to defend himself and make an honest quid. The cops wrote up a report and gave it to Sergeant Burrows. Like most cops, Burrows seemed a big brute, and the boys had no idea that their caper was a little concern to him. But we really shit ourselves. Burrows told them they just couldn't go around shooting kids because they thought they were about to rob them. Well, why not? Do you understand that, he roared us? And they both shit themselves. Now, because you're making an honest quid, I'm going to be lenient with this. We'll keep your slug guns and I'll give them back to you only if you come back with your parents. Now, fuck off home. Yeah, the boys thought they got off lightly and had good luck about it. But they never told our parents and we never went back for the guns. At home they counted up the takings. It had been a big day and they finally had enough money to buy their bikes and give the horseshit cape to the fleet for good. Next Sunday, Brian and Winnie went up to Snows Mountain. Big Kev rode his matchless and the boys rode their BSA bands. Bees as they were called. Twister was up there with a few of his mates, but that didn't worry the boys. This was the day that Twister would meet his match in Big Kev. Twister thought he was king shit and got up to him straight away. You bastards put that log on a track, I nearly killed myself. The boys said nothing and tried to look innocent. What log, Twister? Big Kev asked. He was big enough to take shit from no one, and they included Twister. Get fucked. Twister gunned his bike. You want to race, Kev? Kev was ready. They agreed on 3 laps around the hill and lined up with motors running. Someone yelled, 3, 2, 1, go, and off they went. Twister got in front, cut Big Kev off whenever he tried to overtake. Kev backed off and waited until Twister turned around to see what was happening behind him, and then he shot through on Twister's blind side and led it until they finished. The boys cheered loudly. It was the first time anyone had beaten Twister. When he and his mates left, no one said a fucking word. I'm gonna have a drink. Try and work this. It's only a cup of tea, I might add. One night, Winnie watched the Wild One on television. He suddenly knew what he wanted to do with his life. Something to do with motorbikes and a band of mates. To feel the wind in his face, just like Marlon Brando and his gang. He was impressed with the way they carried themselves and knew then and there that he was going to be a bikie. Whatever that was and whatever it took. After his run-in with brother Michael, he determined to spend the least amount of time at school, and Brian agreed. We've got to get out of this place, mate. School was bad enough, but the Catholic shit was way too much. First they try to shove it down your throat. When that fails, they try to stick it up your arse, Brian said, and they laughed long and hard. The decision to quit wasn't entirely theirs, though, because the truant officers eventually took them to juvenile court and they were sent to different reform schools until they reached 15. Brian went to Mount Penang on the Central Coast, and Winnie went to Mittagong's boys' home. Since they had no trade, they were probably destined to work in the local factories. But when they came out, they had learned separate valuable skills. Brian knew how to steal motorcycles, grind the engine and frame numbers off, stamp on new numbers, paint and register them, and sell them and resell them for a fat profit. While Winnie had grown a foot, filled out and learned he had to lead men by quietly applying his steely will. He reckoned someone had to be in charge, and it might as well be him. As soon as they could, they opened their own little factory in the garden shed in Winnie's backyard and resold a few stolen bikes. Soon Ocker and Big Kev quit their factory jobs and joined in. Because Winnie and Brian offered better hours, conditions and pay to do shit they like, simple choice really. On Friday and Saturday nights in the early 1960s, 300 bikers from all over Sydney met at the Centennial Hotel at Woollahra to hit the piss and show off their British bikes. In those days, Harley-Davidson bikes were rare. Blokes reckoned they were too noisy and that they sounded like tractors. Winnie and about 20 of his mates would ride into Sydney and drag each other off from the traffic lights. Big Kev once chucked a wheelie and nearly ran over a couple who were slowed to clear a crossing. He soon developed a reputation as a hard cut. When Winnie pulled up at the next traffic lights, he leaned over to Kev and told him, "You're going to kill someone one day." "Yeah, I know," Kev yelled, and raced off to the next light, wearing a grin a yard wide. Outside the pub, the boys bragged about their motorbikes. Under a full moon, the chrome glistened on a long, menacing line of motorbikes parked at the curb. When a roar announced the arrival of a pack of 50 bikes, the pub emptied to watch the new arrivals park wherever they liked. Kev recognised Twister. "Hey Winnie, fucking Twister's getting big." "Yeah, but he's still ugly." Twister and his few mates walked over. Twister and a few of his mates walked over. "Ah, the little boys are here." Big Kev stepped out of the shadows, and Twister's face turned white. He hadn't seen Kev for a while. Kev was over 6'4" and built like a Mallee bull. Twister stuck his hand out to Winnie. "How you going, boys? Nice bikes you got here. Why don't you come inside and have a beer?" Winnie spoke up. "Twister, later maybe." Twister headed into the pub, followed by his mates. "I don't trust that cunt, Winnie," said Ocker. "Me neither, Ocker. He's a snake. Anyway, we have a little work to do before pleasure." They wandered down the line of bikes and made their selection of the ones they liked, recording the number plates for Ocker. His brother worked in a motor registry often and would slip them the addresses. The boys would turn up, nick the bike and do a rebirth in the shed. It was just that easy, but most of the bikes were insured so the blokes didn't lose. Their work was done. The boys made their way into the Centennial, ordered beers and watched the band. They found a table near the dance floor filled with girls in tight jeans and t-shirts that showed off their titties. A young one with blonde hair, long blonde hair, dressed in imitation leopard skin tights, that danced alone. Winnie thought she didn't fit in. Maybe it was her age. She was a kid. "Hey, Winnie," Big Kev called out. "It's your shout." But Winnie didn't hear a word. "You can't keep your eyes off her, can you, mate?" Winnie made his way into the bar and where Twister held court and told jokes. "Hey, Winnie, aren't you going to have a beer?" "I'll have one with you out at Little Bay." "If you're going, we'll be going." We'll be going. I heard you got a business going and I reckon we might do something together." "I don't think so, Twister." Back at the table, Winnie set the beers down in front of his mates. "Hey, Brian, Ocker, I want to tell you something." The boys leaned in. "Twister must know what we're up to with the hot bikes. He just put it to me that he'd like to do business with us." "I'm just wondering, how does he know? Has anybody said anything?" The boys looked blank. Brian spoke at last. "Well, we sold a hot Triumph to one of the blokes with Twister. Twist's going to have a beer with me out at Little Bay. I'll see what else he has to say. The band played and Winnie checked out the crowded dance floor. The girl in imitation leopard skin tights, but she was gone. Big Kev, who kept an eye on everything, yelled out over the band. I think she went to the little girl's room, mate. The beer soon had an effect on everyone, and eventually a fight on the dance floor turned into a full-on brawl. Blokes from all sides ran in and started swinging fists. The band unplugged and walked off while the bouncers stood back and watched. It went on for a few minutes until the sound of sirens signalled arriving cops and the pub emptied like magic. It was almost 10 o'clock, closing time. So the boys pooled their cash and Ocker raced off to get a few dozen at the bottle-o. Ocker stayed their beer in saddlebags while the pigs made a few arrests. Then 300 bikies started their engines and took off into the night. The noise could have awakened the dead. Big Kev sidled up to Winnie and nodded towards a girl standing in the shadows outside the pub. There she is, Winnie. She stood alone and looked scared. Kev nudged Winnie. You better be quick, mate, before someone else grabs her. Winnie pulled his island bike onto its stand and made his way over. There was no time for niceties. Do you want to ride to the party? She nodded. He pulled down the rear foot pegs, showed her where to put her feet and yelled, Have you been on a bike before? No, she mouthed. He mounted up, hop on and hang tight. He found first gear and shot off in a hurry, heading for a Little Bay. It turned out to be a fast ride on twisting and curving roads. When he felt her tits rubbing on his back and gave him high hopes for a night of quiet fucking in the dunes by the sea. He followed the other bikes to the party but made his way to a place away from the fire. The boys followed him. They probably thought they were onto an onion, a gangbang, you know. That's what we call a gangbang, an onion. But when he had other ideas, he turned off the engine and helped the girl off his bike. He noticed her eyes were glazed. What's your name, Mimi? He was a bit worried she didn't look right. Are you pissed or what? No, I'm just stoned. She smiled. What do you mean stoned? Hey, we didn't know what pot was in them days. Never heard of it, you know? When he was in the dark, he hated feeling ignorant, but he'd never heard the word before. Marijuana, she said. Haven't you boys heard of it? When he said nothing, what he knew and what he didn't know was his business. He called the boys over to introduce them to Mimi. The boys salivated. Something like that. Do any of you blokes know what stoned is? I always knew everything. Yeah, it's when you smoke dope. When the surfers are into it. She leaned over and whispered in Winnie's ear, Would you like some? He nodded and grabbed her hand as they walked up into the dark towards the sand joys. The boys wanted to come, but Winnie turned and shook his head. They wouldn't follow unless he signalled them. Winnie had a feeling about her. She differed from the scrags and wannabes he met. She pulled out a tobacco pouch and rolled a cigarette. This is a joint. What's your real name? Peter Winifred. Winnie to me, mates. Enjoyed that ride tonight. It was the first time I've ever been on a bike. Do you always go to the pub? No, tonight's my first time. My father always told me to keep away. Not from the pub, but from the biking. How come you went then? Well, I'm just curious. Where do you live? Rose Bay. And you? Fairfield? That's out west, isn't it? At least I know where Rose Bay is, Winnie muttered and lit the joint. He felt insecure for a second. She was putting him down because of where he lived. But after his first puff, he couldn't have cared less. I still remember my first joint. It changed him almost immediately. He just smiled at her and handed back the joint. He felt terrific. The effect was calming and very private, and he just stared at her thinking she was the most beautiful girl he'd ever met. They always look like that when you're stoned, but... They lay on the sand and she reached over and tousled his hair. He closed his eyes and listened to the waves and smelt the salt air. After a while he came out of it and asked, Where can I get some marijuana? Down at Bondi from the surfies. They'll buy it up the north coast and bring it down. Winnie had no idea what she was talking about, so he just nodded. He knew this was better than beer and he wondered if there might be a good earning for him and his mates. He just had to find out how. Lying there next to her, he couldn't believe he was with this girl. Normally he'd be groping her tits and going for it, but she was no onion, that he knew.